Bubbles in your wood coating are definitely one of the leading causes of stress for wood finishers. If your wood finish looks like it came from a soda bottle, don't fear. I'm Darrel Young with Campbell, and you've reached the finish line. There are many different reasons why bubbles can occur in your coating film. Bubbles are a normal part of the whole atomization and application process. When I atomize a coating into tiny little droplets with a spray gun and those little droplets hit the surface of the wood, they tend to trap pockets of air in between the droplets as those droplets accumulate. And all those little pockets of air need to rise to the surface and bust before the coating dries. My bubbles might just be a product of the application, the atomization process. It could also be solvent pop, and solvent pop is when solvent in the coating evaporates into a gas while it's still in the liquid coating film. And if the coating film has skinned over by this time, you end up with a little pop or a bubble that's really not air, but actual solvent vapor trapped in the coating film. It can also be air in the pores of the wood, especially on open grain woods like oak or mahogany or walnut. If you put a thick sealer directly on the bare wood, you can trap air in the grain of the wood, and as the sealer slowly runs down into the grain, it displaces the air, and the air comes up in the form of a bubble. If the coating is dried or skinned over before the bubble makes it to the surface, again, you're stuck with a bubble trapped in the coating film. Also, your application equipment can be the cause of the problem. When I'm spraying through pumps, air-assisted airless pumps or airless pumps, for example, those types of equipment exert a lot of different forces on a coating. The force is exposed to a vacuum. It's then pumped under pressure through a tiny little orifice. There's a lot of shear involved. And all of these different things can cause tiny little micro bubbles in the coating that, again, can show up in the dried coating film. Excessive mixing of the coating prior to application, especially in waterborne coatings, can also be problematic, making the coating very foamy, and some of that foam may find its way onto the dried coating film. So in many cases, it's very difficult to figure out why the bubbles are there. If you know, then it's best to try to address the specific problem. If you know that it might be atomization related, make sure you're getting adequately small particle size. That is, you're using the right pressure and tip combination. In the case of a pump, you're using adequate pressure to get small particle size. Big particles entrap larger pockets of air. If you suspect solvent pop, that is, you are spraying in high temperatures or you are trying to expedite the dry time of the coating by heating it up, well, in those conditions, if the temperatures are high, use a retarder or a flow enhancer in the coating to keep it wet a little longer to allow for resolution of the bubbles. If you are force drying or heating the coating, allow it to dry to the touch before you apply heat. If you put the wet coating directly under the heat, that can cause solvent pop all by itself. If I suspect my bubbles are the result of air trapped in the grain of the wood, such as the case where I'm spraying oak or mahogany, I may want to reduce my first coat, my sealer, with some lacquer thinner so it's a little bit more watery and so it readily runs into the grain of the wood and displaces air instead of trapping air bubbles in the open grain of the wood. If I'm getting micro bubbles, or I think I'm getting micro bubbles caused by my spray equipment, use the minimal amount of pressure required to get reasonable atomization. And also make sure that your pickup tube on your pump is of a suitable size for the type of material you're spraying. And what I mean by that is a thicker material requires a larger pickup tube. It's kind of like trying to sip a milkshake through a really tiny little straw. You got to put a lot of vacuum on it to pull it up, whereas a bigger straw allows it to flow more readily. So the same thing goes for a pump. We want an adequately sized pickup tube and fluid section for what we're spraying. If I'm trying to spray a really thick primer through a pump that's intended for low viscosity clear coats, that's probably going to be problematic. Don't excessively mix your coating. Coating shouldn't be whipped or blended. Water-based coatings actually fare somewhat better if they're able to be stirred or agitated with a drill mixer on an air drill, that kind of a thing. Solvent-based coatings can be shaken. Water-based coatings, when you shake them, tend to get pretty foamy. So we can avoid that if possible. One final reason you might be experiencing bubbles is wet on tack application. That's where I spray on one coat, let it kind of dry to the touch, and then spray another coat directly on top without sanding. The challenge with this practice is the solvents in the first coat may not have adequately evaporated out of that first coat before you spray the second coat on, and that second coat may trap solvent in that layer that's going to show up as bubbles. Again, kind of a complicated thing, but the fix to that is make sure that, number one, don't use wet on tack application unless it's recommended by the manufacturer. And if the manufacturer does recommend it and you're getting bubbles, stretch out your time a little bit. That is, if the manufacturer says wet on tack is permissible within 2 hours of spraying the first coat, make sure you give that first coat a good hour plus to breathe before you put the second coat on. So thanks for joining us today on this episode of The Finish Line. Remember to post any questions or comments you have below. And also please remember to like, share, or subscribe to this episode. Thanks for joining us again, and we'll see you soon.